Number 5. The Mary Celeste. Probably the most famous mystery ship on our list today is the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that was found drifting in December of 1872 off of the Azores with her crew of 10 nowhere to be found. The Canadian brigantine De Gratia found her in a disheveled but seaworthy condition under partial sail and with her lifeboat missing. There were also signs that something had gone wrong. To be specific, one of its pumps was dismantled, but once again, that ship was still seaworthy, and there was no hint as to why the crew and passengers had abandoned it. The last entry in her log was dated around 10 days earlier. She had left New York City for Genoa on November 7th and was still amply provisioned when found. Her cargo of alcohol was intact, and the captain's and crew's belongings were undisturbed. None of those who had been on board were ever seen or heard from ever again. Among the missing was the captain, his wife, and their very young daughter. On December 23rd of 1872, during a court hearing to try and establish just what happened, Frederick Soliflude, who was the Attorney General of Gibraltar, ordered an examination of the Mary Celeste, which was carried out by John Austin, surveyor of shipping, with the assistance of a diver, Ricardo Fortunato. Austin noted cuts on each side of the bow caused by a sharp instrument, and found possible traces of scarlet fluid on the captain's sword. His report emphasized that the ship did not appear to have been struck by heavy weather, citing a vial of sewing machine oil found upright in its place. Now, Austin did not acknowledge that the vial might have been replaced since the abandonment, nor did the court raise this point. Fortunato's report on the hull concluded that the ship had not been involved in a collision or run aground. A further inspection by a group of Royal Naval captains endorsed Austin's opinion that the cuts on the bow had been caused deliberately. They also discovered stains on one of the ship's rails that might have been bodily fluids, together with a deep mark possibly caused by an axe. These findings strengthened Flood's suspicions that human wrongdoing, rather than natural disaster, was the cause for the mystery. On January 22nd of 1873, he sent the reports to the Board of Trade in London, adding his own conclusion that the crew had gotten at the alcohol on board and, killed the Briggs family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. They had cut the bows to simulate a collision and then fled in the yawl to suffer an unknown fate. Flood thought that Morehouse and his men were hiding something, specifically that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned in a more easterly location, and that the log had been doctored. He just couldn't accept that the Mary Celeste could have been traveled so far, uncrewed. Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, helped make the ship famous with a short story vaguely based on the event, in which foul play explains the enigma. A 2007 theory, reported by the Smithsonian, suggests that perhaps the captain made the call to abandon ship in sight of land after the ship's pumps became fouled. Normally, it would be unusual for a captain to abandon a seaworthy vessel, but the captain may not have been able to tell just how much water the ship was taking on with the pumps broken. The ship was also slightly off course and had been battling bad weather, which may have prompted the captain to take the chance at land when he could. To this day, the crew of the mysterious vessel was never found. Also, despite many theories, no one can say with any certainty why the ship was abandoned. The Mary Celeste sailed for 12 years after it was abandoned, and finally struck the Rochelet Reef off of the coast of Haiti and became stuck there. And it's still there. It was discovered in 2001. Let me know what your theory is in the comments. Number 4. The Carroll A. Deering. This ship was built in Bath, Maine in 1919 by the G.G. Deering Company for commercial use. One of the last large commercial sailing vessels, the ship was designed to carry cargo and had been in service for a year when it began its final voyage to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So the cargo ship and its 10-man crew successfully made it to Rio de Janeiro in 1920, despite needing to change captains when its original one fell ill, but something strange happened on its way back to Virginia. A lightship keeper in North Carolina said a crewman who didn't seem very officer-like reported the ship had lost its anchors while the rest of the crew was milling about suspiciously. The ship was still in good condition when it was spotted from Cape Hatteras on January 31st of 1921 before it was torn apart on the Diamond Shoals. Another ship spotted the Carroll A. Deering near Outer Banks the next day in an area that would have been a strange course for a ship on its way to Norfolk, Virginia. Now, if someone wants to fight me on that pronunciation, I swear I consulted a couple of friends who live in Virginia for that one. The following day, a shipwreck was spotted, but dangerous conditions kept investigators away for 4 days. When they went aboard, eventually, they found food laid out as if they were getting ready for a meal, but the crew's personal belongings and the lifeboats were gone. So, what happened to the captain and crew? All 12 men were missing in action, with no idea what the heck could have transpired. A month after the Coast Guard began investigating the Carroll A. Deering, a new theory was formed related to the disappearance of another vessel, the Hewitt, around, the same time. The Hewitt was making its way from Sabine, Texas to Portland, Maine, carrying a cargo of sulfur when it sent its last message on January 25th off of the coast of Florida. When the vessel never arrived in Boston where it was expected on January 29th, a search began. The Hewitt and her crew had also disappeared without a trace, and the popular theory questioned if the ships could have collided. but the lack of oars, life preservers, or other floating wreckage disproves the idea. But 58 men were now lost. In April of 1921, a message in a bottle found by a man on the North Carolina coast seemed to give the answer to the mystery. Deering captured by oil-burning boat, the note read. Now the State Department began an investigation into the Deering and several other ships, and it was suspected that the Deering had been captured by pirates. Arrgh. Then the newspapers began reporting the possibility of a Bolshevik plot to steal the ships, cargo, and crews and somehow whisk them all away to Russian ports. By September, however, it was discovered that the message found in the bottle, the only real evidence of what may have happened to the crew, was in fact written by the man who supposedly found it. Mr. Christopher Columbus Gray faked the note in the hopes that he could discredit the staff at the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse and take someone's job. It's a dramatic way to get a job, but hey, whatever works. The hoax had prompted investigations by the US Navy, Treasury, State Department, Department of Commerce, and Department of Justice. Without the note, however, the investigations fizzled out and ended without an official explanation. The federal government has followed numerous leads on pirates, mutinies, and more, but they've got nothing. So do I.
In at number 3 we have Jazirat Al Hamra, which is best known as the ghost town of the United Arab Emirates, is said to be the country's most haunted place, remaining a number of spooky events experienced by the locals and curious visitors. Jazirat Al Hamra is an abandoned village located to the south of the city of Ras Al Khaimah, one of the 7 emirates that form the UAE. The coastal territory is the region's best example of a pre-oil village, displaying 3 distinct types of early and mid-20th century Gulf architecture. The town of Ras Al Khaimah is the crumbling remains of a once thriving fishing village. The name translates to Red Island for the red and bronze colour of the sand on which the town was built. The former tidal island was predominantly home to the Zab tribe, who by 1831 developed the area into a renowned pearling trade centre, was home to over 4,000 inhabitants and dozens of fishing and trading ships, and with its good fortune came expansion that continued well into the start of the 20th century. But by 1968, Al Jazirat Al Hamra became nothing more than an abandoned town, due to a clash between the tribe and Sheikh Saka bin Mohammed of Ras Al Khaimah due to some unclear reasons. Thus most of them migrated to Abu Dhabi. The village consisted of 334 buildings, including 18 shops and 11 mosques, and is nearly unchanged since its people left in 1968. Al Jazirat Al Hamra, now filled in patch of land in the south of Ras Al Khaimah, remained abandoned and untouched. However, rumor has it that this extraordinary quiet and silent village is extremely haunted by the jinns. People even gossip that they can hear the strange noise and disembodied voices near the beach of this ghost village. Many visitors also assert that they felt uneasy, like danger was lurking, waiting for them when they pressed on further into the haunted village. Some of them even claim to have reported seeing unexplainable handprints on the ruined pillars and walls, and experienced many more paranormal things within this haunted ghost town. In at number 2 we have Pyramiden, Norway. Some say that the Soviet town of Pyramiden, Norway was abandoned overnight, and for a good reason. Located in Svalbard, an archipelago situated between Norway and the North Pole, Pyramiden can be reached by boat from about mid-May until the beginning of October, when waters bordering the town are free from sea ice. Established in the 17th century, the town was used as a base for whaling and walrus trapping. Though at the start of the 20th century the culture shifted to coal mining. At first Pyramiden was a sleepy place with hardly any residents at all, but after World War II the Soviets allocated more money to the town. They constructed dozens of new buildings, including a hospital, a recreation centre called the Cultural Palace, and a large cafeteria. In the 1980s the town's population reached its peak of more than 1,000 people, but not long due to the wake of the Soviet Union's dissolution the town would be left completely abandoned. As when the Soviet Union fell apart, mining stopped in Pyramiden and the miners had to leave. On March 31st, 1998, the last coal was extracted from the mine and the approximately 300 workers who still lived there began shipping out. The residents never returned, and today the town still stands much as it was when the last men departed. And finally, in at number 1 we have Batso Village, New Jersey. There are around 28 known ghost towns in New Jersey, but this one has to be the most terrifying. Founded in 1766, the Batso Village was built primarily to accommodate once prosperous ironworks. At the time, the site possessed 3 valuable resources: water for mills, abundant wood for charcoal, and naturally occurring bog iron. During the Revolutionary War, Batso supplied the Continental Army with iron, while its remoteness protected it from British attack. In 1784, Batso was bought by William Richard, whose family owned and operated the ironworks for 92 years. Following the discovery of coal and ore in Pennsylvania, in the 1840s the iron industry began to dwindle in the Batso village. Nervous they were going to run out of business, the Richards family exploited another abundant local resource, sand, to make glass. But in 1874, a house fire spread and destroyed the glass-making facilities, remaining furnaces, and 17 houses that were in the town. Due to the destruction of the glass facilities, the town of Batso and the Richards family fell into bankruptcy. The Richards and many of the villagers moved away after the accident, leaving the site silent. In 1876, the property, along with huge tracts of land around it, was purchased by industrialist and businessman Joseph Wharton, with the plan of reinventing the declining town into an agricultural, foresting, and cranberry farm. But after his death in 1909, the land was held by a trust until purchased by the state in 1954 to form the Wharton State Forest. The state's plan for the town was to restore its 50-room mansion, as well as to rebuild the dam that was located on the lake, though the efforts to reinvent Batso weren't enough to save it from its inevitable end. As when the state of New Jersey bought the village with a plan of improving it, the residents didn't see a future in the town, so they all left it, with roots that can be traced back to 1766 and the last remaining resident leaving in 1989. There are more than 40 structures still standing in the historic town, including a charcoal kiln, carriage houses, stables, ice and milk houses, a blacksmith, general store, gristmill, and a wheelwright shop, though they are all left untouched since the last residents left in 1989.
Coming in number 5, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Sounds like a nice enough place, right? Who would abandon a prosperous coal mining community filled with interesting folks and a fun name? Well, anyone who likes to breathe things other than noxious gas. Oh, this one is less a mystery and more of a straight up fact, but the abandonment is super scary regardless of how you look at it. Way back in the day, Centralia was bustling. Rich veins of coal were discovered underneath the earth here, and folks were really excited to bring it up to the surface. What better way to make a profit? Unfortunately, this subterranean resource and favorite of Minecraft kids across the globe is also the reason for Centralia's downfall. The very same stuff that brought about plenty of business also made the town uninhabitable. Tragic, and maybe a nice little microcosm of the human experience. Apparently a landfill burn spread a little further than folks were expecting and ignited the underground coal. From an abandoned coal mine to the rich veins of black gold underground, this fire spread like, well, wildfire, scorching everything around. 140 acres of town, gone, just like that. A lot of it is still standing, but it's not safe to be around. The underground fires belch all sorts of horrid smoke, and many large sinkholes opened up due to the fire's influence. These days you might sense a presence or two while passing by, but don't worry, they're not ghosts, not yet anyways. Of the few thousand who used to live there, only about a half dozen remain. They refused to abandon their once lovely town, determined to live amidst the smoke and gas, the fire and flames. It doesn't look like the fires are going out anytime soon either. Some estimates see the blaze continuing on for a few hundred years, thanks to the constant supply of fuel underground. Coming in number 4, we've got Deception Island, Antarctica. Another wild and wonderful name. If I could choose to name the place I lived in anything, Deception would definitely be on the list. That's the kind of town that famous folk albums get named after, a place of legend for miles around. A place of rest, perhaps, or place of mystery. Deception is often thought of as a negative thing. Nobody likes being lied to, but if it's done well enough, deception can achieve plenty of things. But I'm getting off topic. We should be discussing the actual abandoned place, full of mystery, full of danger. Deception Island was a long-used whaling station back in the day. Norwegian folks would post up there for long stretches of time, enjoying the island's safe natural harbor. Eventually it became known for its research potential, attracting all sorts of folks from Britain and Chile. Now, I know what you're all thinking. A research base out in the middle of deep freeze nowhere. Well, there's gotta be some sort of lunatic alien there, morphing into different shapes and eating everyone for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And my mind went to the same place. But even after all of this, the island was also used as a British base during World War II, so maybe less deadly aliens after all, because the soldiers would have run into something like that. Although this island is also home to the largest cemetery in Antarctica, so chew on that for however long you need to. These days, the area is protected as a heritage site, so all of the abandoned, decrepit shacks, huts, and buildings are still there to be seen. Who knows what secrets and spirits lurk within, perishing due to cold, war, or something more supernatural. Oh, and one last thing about this location. Even though it's as cold as ice and difficult for any living being to survive out here, there is something else that makes it even more dangerous. There are occasional volcanic eruptions on the island. Pardon me? So yeah, you'd best stay far, far away from this long abandoned haven. Even haven seems like a bit of a misnomer, don't you think?
Number 3, the Penang War Museum. I think it's a very good sign that your museum is a friendly, welcoming place. If you Google it and the first results are an article called The Horrors on Ghost Hill, and a listing for an IMDb episode for a series called I Wouldn't Go There, featuring your museum. It's either really hurting or really helping the tourism there. Well, if those warning signs weren't enough to deter you, enter the Penang War Museum, my little ghouls and goblins. It's been described as one of the most haunted spots in Asia, flat out. The Penang Museum is built atop the grave of an old army fort built by the British in the 1930s, but was taken control by the Japanese in the late 30s in World War II, and used to house prisoners for as long as the prisoners lived, which was usually not very long, if the site of the guillotine is anything to go by. After the end of the Second World War, the place had become totally abandoned, until it was retrofitted to become a museum, and serve as a reminder of the grim reality of war and its costs. The whole place kind of has this eerie, abandoned ghost town vibe as you walk through tunnels and old bunkers, serving to try and replicate what it would be like to actually work and spend time in a place like this while it was functioning. Given the very grim nature of the content and the site itself, which was home to so much bloodshed, death, hatred, and all the worst parts of our souls, it's no surprise that the museum has an infamous reputation as a spot for paranormal activity. Guests have reported seeing strange sightings, unusual shadows, and feeling chills as they walk through the bunkers. But all of this begs the question, would ghosts even be scarier than the actual truth of this place? Now, I've never been, but from what I was looking at and gathering for this, it seems to me like the true horror of the Penang Museum is that it's a reflection of some of the worst parts of the human experience. A reminder of what happens during wartime and what people do to one another. This place doesn't need stories of spirits. It's haunted enough as is by the memories that will forever be tied to it. Number 2, the Mütter Museum. Mütter is the German word for mother. That's your fact for today, so you can tell your Mütter that you learned something from this video. Well, this isn't a museum for moms or about moms, although they're more than welcome to come. The Mütter Museum in Philadelphia isn't quite like the other museums on this list. It's not particularly known for being paranormal or haunted, but rather it's a collection of medical oddities and curios all arranged behind cabinets in a very clean, professional manner. It's not known for vengeful spirits or anything walking the halls, but rather just home to an incredible amount of very creepy things in jars. Every picture of the place looks like something out of a mad scientist's lab, a background of a B horror movie set, that one weird place from that one Harry Potter movie, maybe I'm remembering that wrong. Amputated limbs float in jars next to organs, fetuses from all sorts of animals you can imagine, and more bones than you could possibly shake a femur at. They got skulls of all kinds. They got skulls for days. They got an entire wall dedicated solely to the skulls of criminals, and all sorts of broken skulls in disarray, eaten by tumors or other lovely diseases. If you're looking for skulls, they have got skulls. They've got a collection of famous remnants, Albert Einstein's brain if you want to see if some of that rubs off on you, Grover Cleveland's famous tumor. Well, we all love Grover Cleveland's tumor. Pack the whole car up, let's go see that. You know, fun stuff. Now, guests who visit the Mütter Museum do pretty frequently complain of feeling dizzy and uneasy while wandering through the collection, but whether or not that's because of some poltergeist or spiritual influence, or because you're wandering through a 6,000 square foot room looking at hundreds of brains, bones, and disembodied organs in jars, is up for some debate. I know just reading about this thing already makes me feel kind of squeamish, makes my stomach feel all churny. I wonder if they have a little cafe in this one, like most museums have. You think anybody's eating there? And number 1, the Museum of Death. The Museum of Death. Well, I wonder what sort of topics they enjoy covering at the Museum of Death. I bet they have an absolutely illuminating look at pre-Raphaelite art of the late 19th to early 20th centuries. They don't? What? No, at the Museum of Death, opened in Hollywood in 1995, which was opened by a married couple with the intention to make people happy to be alive. Whew. How do they accomplish this? Do they show you pictures of whiskers on kittens and raindrops on roses? No, of course not. It's a collection of everything to do with death. Bones, skulls, coffins, ancient mortician's tools, executioner's equipment, and a whole lot more. Amusingly, the owners have said their goal is not to scare anyone with this museum. That's not what their museum is about. Now sure, they play videos of autopsies and they have footage and imagery from incredibly grisly and stomach-churning real-life true crime cases like artifacts from Charles Manson's family or some of Jeffrey Dahmer's personal effects, but they don't want to scare you. The museum is there to show death in its brutal, unedited honesty. The owners themselves describe it as a commemoration of life. And I gotta be honest, I'm making it sound worse than it is, but it definitely does sound interesting. And the grimmest parts of me are definitely more than a little curious to check it out in that morbid sort of way, because it sounds cool. Probably a great date spot to take a goth girl, I bet. The museum does kind of embrace its sort of twisted reputation and really runs with it. It hosts Black Dahlia costume contests where guests are judged on who's got the best post-mortem Black Dahlia costume, which is something. It's not thought to be as haunted as some of the other places on this list, but it does really bring out some visceral reactions in people. Apparently, it's not too uncommon for guests to demand to leave early or to outright faint while walking through the museum. The owners refer to these cases as falling down ovations, which is a very funny turn of a phrase. Now, sadly, if you're listening to all of this and you're already pre-buying tickets for your next trip to LA, sadly, the museum is currently closed down. They are reopening though. They've also got a museum in New Orleans, since their collection of macabre knickknacks is so large it couldn't be contained to just one spot. When it reopens, I recommend you get out as soon as you can. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Coming in at 5, Hashima Island, Japan. Hashima Island is an abandoned island lying about 15 kilometers from the city of Nagasaki in southern Japan. It is one of 505 uninhabited islands in Nagasaki Prefecture. The island's most notable features are its abandoned concrete buildings, undisturbed except by nature and the surrounding sea wall. While the island is a symbol of the rapid industrialization of Japan, it is also a reminder of its history as a site of forced labor prior to and during the Second World War. The island reached a peak population of 5,259 in 1959, and in 1974, with the coal reserves nearing depletion, the mine was closed and all of the residents departed soon after, leaving the island effectively abandoned for the following 3 decades. Interest in the island then re-emerged in the 2000s on account of its undisturbed historic ruins, and it gradually became a tourist attraction. The island is increasingly gaining international attention, not only generally for its modern regional heritage, but also for the undisturbed housing complex remnants representative of the period from the Taisho period to the Showa period. It has become a frequent subject of discussion among enthusiasts for ruins. Since the abandoned island has not been maintained, several buildings have collapsed mainly due to typhoon damage, and other buildings are in danger of collapse. However, some of the collapsed exterior walls have been restored with concrete. The island was formally approved as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in July 2015 as part of Japan's sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution, iron and steel, shipbuilding and coal mining. In at 4, Eastern State Penitentiary, Pennsylvania. The Eastern State Penitentiary, also known as ESP, is a former prison in Philadelphia that was operational from 1829 until 1971. The penitentiary refined the revolutionary system of separate incarceration first pioneered at the Walnut Street Jail, which emphasized principles of reform rather than punishment. Notorious criminals such as Al Capone and bank robber Willie Sutton were also held inside its innovative wagon wheel design. Originally, inmates were housed in cells that could only be accessed by entering through a small exercise yard attached to the back of the prison. Only a small portal, just large enough to pass meals, opened onto the cell blocks. The design in turn proved impractical, and in the middle of construction, cells were constructed that allowed prisoners to enter and leave the cell blocks through metal doors that were covered by a heavy wood door to filter out noise. Some believe that the doors were small so prisoners would have a harder time getting out, minimizing an attack on a security guard. Others have explained the small doors forced the prisoners to bow while entering their cells. This design is related to penance and ties to the religious inspiration of the prison. The prison was one of the largest public work projects of the early Republic and was a tourist destination in the 19th century. Visitors spoke with prisoners in their cells, proving that inmates were not isolated, though the prisoners themselves were not allowed to have any visits with family or friends during their stay. The prison is now abandoned, however it operates as a museum and historic site, open year-round. However, those who have visited have noted a weird presence inside its walls, and it is said that its former inmates haven't quite left the building yet.
Number 3. Missouri State Penitentiary. Once dubbed the bloodiest 47 acres in America, it is no surprise at all that Missouri State Pen is home to all kinds of rumors to be haunted by the souls of its former inmates. The prison was nicknamed The Walls, and shortly after its construction was already home to 2,000 inmates, doubling that size in the progressing years. The prison was home to several riots and escape attempts, with the most infamous attempt occurring in 1954, when some 2,500 inmates participated in a massive day-long riot. 4 buildings burned and the National Guard was called in. Shockingly, out of this, only 4 inmates were fatally injured during this event, and none managed to escape, lending to the prison's hard reputation. Now, the prison has always been reported to be haunted, even during its operation, with both guards and inmates during its service claiming to see spectral apparitions. Most of the ghost stories come out of the prison's oldest building, the A building, home to some of the crueler punishments, including an underground room called the Dungeon, a dank, hostile basement with a low ceiling forcing prisoners into a subservient position where the only light that could be observed was a slit through the door. Modern visitors to the dungeon complain of the disgusting odor of bodies that's pungent, and they feel like they're being watched. Disembodied voices have even been picked up by EVP monitors while wandering through the dungeon. In the control room, visitors report occasionally seeing a spirit called Fast Jack, a medical practitioner from the prison's operating days, who can be seen appearing as a ghastly figure holding a clipboard and a white lab coat, frantically scurrying around the control room trying to carry out some duty from when he was alive, slamming lockers and opening doors. Several ghost hunting groups over the years have investigated the Missouri State Pen, including legendary ghost hunting hero Zach Baggins and the Ghost Adventures crew, finding mysterious voices and what looked like shadow people wandering the halls. Although the bloodiest 47 acres in America might have dried up and the walls are now open to the public, for the inmates who are still impounded there, it's as terrifying as ever. Number 2. West Virginia Penitentiary. Almost heaven. West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, and haunted prisons. The Appalachians might be home to one of the most beautiful parts of the United States, but West Virginia Penitentiary is anything but. In 1863, after West Virginia seceded from Virginia Classic, the new fledgling state needed its own prison, and Moundsville, West Virginia was chosen as the home for their new state pen. The prison's conditions were unlivable. West Virginia Penn frequently made the Department of Justice's top 10 violent prisons in the country. Idea for a new video. An infamous spot in the prison was known as the Sugar Shack, a small rec room for the inmates that served as a hotbed for all kinds of violent illegal activity. The prison is also home to a famous electric chair that an inmate was forced to build, nicknamed Ol' Sparky. Ol' Sparky is still standing there today. In the 1950s, the prison was so overcrowded that 3 prisoners at a time would be shoved into one cramped 7 by 5 foot cell. The men were kept like animals in cages. Riots and violent outbursts were fairly commonplace. The prison was overcrowded, dilapidated and run down, and staffed by overwhelmed guards. Eventually, the prison would be forced to open its gates, decommissioning as a prison and shipping all of its inmates elsewhere. The building still stands and is used as a training facility for law enforcement officers, but it's been said that the spirits of those whose lives ended here still wander. Hunters report equipment malfunctioning walking by the Sugar Shack or any of the cell blocks where the more violent inmates were housed. Reports of banging on the walls late at night, as well as random screams, are fairly commonplace too. The prison was reportedly haunted while inmates still populated it, with some of the earliest stories of hauntings stemming from the 1930s. It's thought that the prison was built on top of an indigenous gravesite of the Adena people, which has led to some speculation as perhaps an explanation for the hauntings. Like most of the prisons on this list, if you're curious enough yourself, West Virginia Penn is available to visit for tours, and you can even pop by the Sugar Shack and Ol' Sparky. And finally, number 1, Alcatraz. Alcatraz might very well be the United States' most infamous prison. On Alcatraz Island, just outside of San Fran, lies the notorious jail, built to house America's most deadly inmates, like Al Capone, Arthur Barker, or George Kelly. It was home to a legendary breakout that was made into a film, Escape from Alcatraz, and also set the stage for Michael Bay's action classic The Rock, which was about breaking into Alcatraz. The prison was built to drain the hope out of inmates, to break the spirits of the most rebellious inmates, and was legendary for its awful conditions. Tiny cramped cells, indifferent guards, and frequent bouts of violence and riots were all commonplace. It was once referred to as the Great Garbage Can of San Francisco, where every other federal prison dumped their worst apples. So it's no surprise, given its brutal conditions, that the island is home to several spirits and hauntings from souls that just can't move on. Most Most ghost investigators report that the hottest spot for paranormal activity in the building is cell 14D, a cell that was also nicknamed the Hole. Gotta wonder if they borrowed that from Eastern State. It was where the most unruly prisoners would be kept when they were being difficult. It's been said that even walking by 14D, you'll immediately feel something's wrong, as if a dark presence or energy is in the room with you. An inmate once spent his last days in 14D, screaming that he was being hunted by an otherworldly creature. Visitors report hearing crying and moaning while walking through cell blocks A, B, and C, where most of the population would have been kept. It's said that a ghost named the Butcher walks through these halls after an inmate named Butcher Malkowitz, a mob hitman, was whacked by another inmate. Now, if this isn't enough haunting for you, some dark tourists also report hearing discordant, disembodied banjo strumming, thought to be a holdover from the spirit of Al Capone, who used to play his banjo in the prison band. Although the prison was decommissioned in 1963, it reopened shortly after, now as a museum and a haunted tour popular with Bay Area locals and visitors curious about learning about one of America's darkest prisons and perhaps its most haunted. Visit if you dare, but just make sure you're able to leave.
In at number 5 we have St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo, Colorado was a former gold mining camp in Chaffee Country. Today it is one of the best preserved ghost towns in Colorado, as the entire district was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. The area was originally settled in 1878 and was made official in 1880, when gold and silver began to bring many people to the area. At one point the population reached more than 2,000 people. In 1881 the Denver, South Park and Pacific Railroad came through the area and a station was built in St. Elmo. From here the tracks continued to Romley, Hancock, and through the historic Alpine Tunnel. St. Elmo was considered the main source of supplies arriving by train for the area settlers, and eventually several merchandise stores, 5 hotels, a telegraph office, a town hall, 5 restaurants, 2 sawmills, a schoolhouse, a weekly newspaper called The Mountaineer, and numerous saloons and dance halls filled the town. The miners worked at several mines throughout the area that were rich in silver, gold, copper, and iron. In 1890 a fire destroyed the business section and the town was never entirely rebuilt. This was about the same time that St. Elmo's peaked in population with about 2,000 residents. Afterward many of the mines were depleted and many miners moved out of the area. More mines continued to fail in the ensuing years and the closure of the Alpine Tunnel in 1910. The state of the structures paired with depleting mines led many in the community in search of new, more prosperous mining towns to call home. The railroad continued to run until 1922 and it has been said that the rest of St. Elmo's population rode the last train out of town, never to return. In 1969 the United States recognized St. Elmo as a historic district, and soon after it became a unique tourist attraction that's open to the public, showcasing what life was like in the Old West. There is no shortage of urban legends and reports of hauntings in St. Elmo, but the most common occurrence of paranormal activity centers around the town's most notable family. To this day one of the members of the Stark family still can be spotted in the ghost town. Anton's only daughter Annabelle resided there until she died in 1960. As legend has it, Annabelle continued her promise to protect the city even after she took her last breath. In at number 4 we have Rhyolite, Nevada. Founded in 1904 and abandoned by 1916, Rhyolite was one of several short-lived boom towns from the late gold rush era. People were drawn to the desert on the edge of Death Valley by the promise of gold found amongst quartz in local mines. And by 1906 the town had all the promising indicators of permanence and the largest population in the area. The town citizens had an active social life, including baseball games, dances, basket socials, whist parties, tennis, a symphony, Sunday school picnics, basketball games, Saturday night variety shows at the Opera House, and pool tournaments. In 1906, Countess Majowski opened the Alaska Glacier Ice Cream Parlor to the delight of the local citizenry. That same year, an enterprising miner, Tom T. Kelly, built a bottle house out of 50,000 beer and liquor bottles. But in 1907, the US financial markets were rocked by panic that saw closures of banks, businesses, and mines. Rhyolite began to falter. The mine closed in 1911. Some claim that Rhyolite, about 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas, was once home to thousands of people, though not much remains of its glory days, which lasted less than 20 years. Set up in 1905, the town was a mining hotspot, but after the richest ore was exhausted, workers left for a new pasture and the population had dropped to close to zero by 1920. Industrialist Charles M. Schwab invested heavily in Rhyolite's infrastructure, which boasted a school, electric lights, water mains, newspapers, a hospital, and even an opera house, some of which can be seen today. There are only around 10 significant structures, yet the site is very evocative. The crumbling remains set against a backdrop of stark desert hills. In at number 3, Aneva Rock Lighthouse, Russia. The Aneva Lighthouse was built by the Japanese in 1939 on a chunk of rock off the southern coast of Sakhalin, just east of Russia. The island was largely uninhabited until the 1800s, when both Japan and Russia became interested in annexing it. A ring of lighthouses were built on Sakhalin's rocky coast to signal incoming troop carriers and merchant ships. After around 50 years of sharing the island, the Russians annexed it all in the Second World War, causing 500,000 Japanese to be evacuated back to Hokkaido. In 1951, the Treaty of San Francisco was signed, officially handing tenure over to the Russians. Now the Aneva lighthouse is abandoned, including its 7 stories of diesel engines, accumulator rooms, keepers' living spaces, radio facilities, storerooms, large clockwork pendulum, and 300 kg pool of mercury. The place now looks like the perfect location for a horror movie, with the building completely deteriorating upon the rock due to the force of the water and wind. However, if you want to visit, you can. Regular tours are organized from Sakhalin's main city. During the 6-day journey, tourists can not only visit the lighthouse but also enjoy the views of the city. Coming in at number 2, Willard Asylum, New York. The Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane is a former state hospital in Willard, New York, near Seneca Lake. The asylum was originally meant to rescue mentally ill people from county facilities where they were typically kept, often chained up or in cages. At Willard, the idea was that patients could be treated and hopefully rejoin society. In reality, Willard was more of a prison than it was a hospital, with patients being kept until the administrators decided they could leave. However, many never did. Worse still, not everyone who found themselves in the asylum were actually insane. Now, as of today, Willard is abandoned, but much of it still remains. The bowling alley built inside its walls during the later years is still standing, with several decaying pins remaining at the end of the lanes. The morgue is also still intact, with the autopsy tables in place next to the drawers where the bodies were stored. Now, in those days when a person died, it was shameful to have one's family name on the grave of a mental hospital. As such, out of respect, none of the graves were marked. Today, efforts are underway to find out who is buried in the graves and replace numbers with names. In the attic is where things have been unearthed though. In 1995, the same year the asylum closed, hundreds of suitcases were discovered in the attic. They had been left behind by the patients who never left the asylum. More than half of the 50,000 patients that came to Willard died within its walls, making this building one of the scariest in history. Finally coming in at number 1, Pripyat, the Chernobyl abandoned city. Yes, we're discussing an entire city with this one, not just one specific building, because honestly there are way too many. Pripyat is a ghost city in northern Ukraine, near the Ukraine-Belarus border. The city was founded on February 4th, 1970 as the 9th nuclear city in the Soviet Union to serve the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was officially proclaimed a city in 1979 and had grown to a population of 49,360 by the time it was evacuated on the afternoon of April 27, 1986, the day after the Chernobyl disaster. The Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on the 26th of April 1986 at the number 4 nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat in the north of the Ukrainian SSR. It is to this day considered the worst nuclear disaster in history and is one of only 2 nuclear energy disasters rated at 7, the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The accident began during a safety test on an RBMK-type nuclear reactor, which was commonly used throughout the Soviet Union. During this test, a large amount of energy was suddenly released, vaporizing superheated cooling water and rupturing the reactor core in a highly destructive steam explosion. This was immediately followed by an open-air reactor core fire that released considerable airborne radioactive contamination for about 9 days that precipitated onto parts of the USSR and Western Europe before finally being contained on May 4th, 1986. Due to the radiation left behind, the entire city was evacuated, and all that remains are the abandoned buildings and a haunting Ferris wheel standing motionless in time. It had been scheduled to have its official opening 5 days after the disaster, in time for May Day celebrations. The Azure swimming pool and Avanhard Stadium are 2 other popular tourist attractions. You can only stay there 2 hours, otherwise you die.
Number 5. Eastern State Penitentiary. Starting off the list is Eastern State Penitentiary. It was a prison built in Philadelphia that wanted to stand out from the rest of the American penal system, trying out a new method of punishment called the Pennsylvania system. Well, do tell, what is the Pennsylvania system? It's not pleasant and has absolutely nothing to do with cheesesteaks. The Pennsylvania system refers to imposing the prisoners to solitary confinement all of the time, 24/7. The prisoners lived alone, ate alone, exercised alone, and were only ever allowed to interact with prison guards. When they were being transported or moved around the prison, the guards would make them don black hoods. Guess it's not nearly as sunny in Philadelphia as Frank Reynolds would have you believe. Now this might not surprise you, but this was not a terribly popular system with inmates. The miserable conditions made the inmates' lives horrendous, but the prison didn't care too much. The system only ended up collapsing in 1913 due to overcrowding in the prison. But Eastern State didn't let this stop them from acting sadistically, and really if anything just inspired them to get a little more creative. Prisoners would have their tongues chained to their wrists. Unruly, troublesome prisoners would be chained to chairs for days on end. They would douse prisoners in freezing cold water, and perhaps worst of all, would trap prisoners into a pit they affectionately nicknamed the Hole, where they'd be kept in the darkness for weeks on end. I'm really not sure if that's any better than the original system. In 1970, after decades of terrorizing its inmates, Eastern State let the last of its inmates free and closed the gates permanently, only to crack them back open a little bit as a tourist location, reopening its walls as a haunted attraction. Due to its horrific history and ominous atmosphere, the prison was rebranded as a haunt, with legends saying that you'll hear all kinds of disembodied laughter, screaming and crying, ghostly figures, shadows moving across the wall, and unexplained footsteps. And if you're looking for more scary stories about prisons or really about anything, then you're at exactly the right place. Stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary for more new scary videos every day. Number 4. Ohio State Reformatory. Ohio State is the picture of a perfect prison. I mean, literally, it was the set for the Shawshank Redemption, so it's kind of a big deal in the prison world. The prison first opened its gates in 1890 and was initially an intermediate penitentiary, a facility for first-time offenders who were deemed too violent to be in other prisons. The inmates were taught basic trades for release and reintegration. However, the prison population started to swell too much by the 20th century, and the reformatory was forced to accept inmates convicted of serious crimes. While day-to-day operations weren't too terribly out of the norm for any other prison, one event in the 1930s may have contributed greatly to the paranormal rumors surrounding it. In the late 1930s, a riot broke out in the East Cell Block, and as punishment, the guards rounded up 120 rioters to share 12 solitary confinement cells together for a week without any food or water. Obviously, this led to multiple prisoners passing away, and even more being broken down to the point of madness. Just outside the prison stands 215 numbered graves, a monument to all the horror that the prison had experienced over the years. Since then, the prison itself has reformed, rehabilitating itself much like Eastern State as a haunted house. Visitors and tour guides who walk through Ohio State report feeling inexplicable chills while walking through the prison's walls. Witnesses say they hear cell doors slam and see dark figures. Those brave enough are welcome to take the prison's tour and attempt to track down spirits of their own, or if you're feeling particularly festive for the Halloween season, you can try the Haunted Prison Experience, a guided tour replete with animatronics and actors for that haunted house feel.
Coming in number 3, we've got Glen Rio, New Mexico / Texas. Or should I say New Texaco? Maybe that's a little cheesy for your liking, but I'll say it anyway. This border town was once a hotspot for tourists, motorists, evangelists, and top 5 lists. Still is, considering that last one. However, like so many spots built along old school highways, this town relied heavily on those just passing through. So when a much bigger, faster, safer highway opened up far away from Glen Rio's limits, the whole place saw some terrible downswing. Gas stations, eateries, general stores, and mechanics all found that there wasn't much to do if the highway traffic wasn't coming through. A tough break for sure. What remains could pass for a location out of a new Fallout game. Empty buildings adorned with imagery consistent with the campy American dream. Burnt out husks of old cars, never to rev their engines again. Empty, sun-bleached motels with rotted out mattresses and busted windows. If anyone wanted to live their post-apocalyptic dream life, here would be the place. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if a few ghouls were roaming the wastes, eking out a modest life amidst the emptiness. When something so obviously meant to be jam-packed with people is devoid of all life, it can be extremely unnerving, and Glen Rio exemplifies this in spades. If I were to visit, I would expect dead silence. However, were some old-fashioned scratchy radio tunes to start playing, I would understand. That's just the ghosts of those who believed in the town trying to boogie after hours. Coming in number 2, we've got Officina Chacabuco in Chile. A lot of ghost towns are left abandoned, with the occasional explorer stumbling through to see what life was all about. When whatever the town relied upon for prosperity, whether it be natural resources, tourism, or celestial protection, runs dry, people drift away. Over time, that means the town is no longer what it used to be, a shell, a husk. It's sad, but it's also just the natural byproduct of industrialization. If a place can no longer be useful, it's cut. However, some people can find other uses for these sinister feeling places. Officina Chacabuco is just such a place. Making its money through nitrate mining at one point, this spot lost a lot of business when petroleum-based fertilizers became the next big thing. Without any other resources to rely upon, those who made their living here had to hightail it out. This left the remote town empty for a number of years. However, during General Pinochet's bloody rule in the 70s, this place was used for something else entirely. Political prisoners would be forcefully brought here and left to fend for themselves in the ghost town. They couldn't escape either, as the regime set up a wicked barrier of barbed wire and landmines. I'm sure more than one individual tried their best to escape, only to end up on the receiving end of some of these implements of death. So whether the town is haunted by the souls of those who lost their livelihood or by those who fought against a dictatorship, it's an extra ghastly ghost town indeed. Coming in at number 1, Pripyat, Ukraine. The ghost town to end all ghost towns. Absolutely full of eerie images, from old propaganda to abandoned, weather-worn dolls. There isn't a creepier experience than sifting through the legendary waste left behind after the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown. After this power plant melted down, introducing the surrounding area to more radiation than 100 times that produced by the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, hundreds of thousands of people had to be evacuated, and fast. For more than 20 years, nobody was allowed back in. Legally anyways, because plenty of folks did go back in spite of warnings against returning. Who knows what the long-term impact of nuclear fallout will be on this area. Generations of wildlife, flora and fauna will be impacted, and the area will be uninhabitable for some time. However, these days the radiation levels are low enough that people can visit the town and take in the ominous vibes. See the abandoned schoolhouses, stroll through homes that were left largely as is since the day of the disaster, witness the destruction caused by the meltdown. The reason behind Pripyat's abandonment aren't that mysterious, but the circumstances surrounding the disaster, the follow-up, and how things are meant to operate now are.
Number 5, the John Zaffis Museum. For someone like John Zaffis, opening a haunted museum was always in the cards. It was practically destiny. Few people can claim to come from a legacy of haunted museums, but Zaffis can, since he's the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren, America's most famous and oftentimes controversial demonologists. Growing up with a large fondness for his aunt and uncle's work, Zaffis developed a love of the paranormal from an early age and saw fit to try and carry on his relatives' work after their passing, opening his own collection of haunted relics the same way that the Warrens did. And what a collection of weird relics Zaffis has picked up. I'll shout out a couple of the cooler ones. The highlight for me has got to be this sword that was used to conjure black magic, and the sword is in like all of the promotional imagery, so it's gotta be pretty good. Check out this photo of Zaffis where he looks like a dark wizard who's also a fantasy author. Among the blade are things like a cast iron skull that was used in occult rituals, plenty of haunted dolls and idols, an ornate elk skull thought to be used in something evil, and loads more. Zaffis does point out on the website, in the frequently asked questions section, not to worry too much about being exposed to this stuff, as everything that's brought into the collection is blessed before taking residence. Although they do make a small warning on the website that there is a teeny tiny small chance that any residual evil might attach to you in the museum. So, I don't know, make sure to wash your hands with hand sanitizer or holy water on the way out. I can't not include this, by the way, but the website also states that if Zaffis believes personally that any of the items in the museum have become too evil or too haunted to remain safe for public display, he throws it into an unspecified body of water. So if you're looking to start a collection of slightly used haunted relics on the cheap, I'd just check out the surrounding bodies of water to the museum. Now, unfortunately, John Zaffis' museum is currently closed. Hey, this list was about ones that had to be abandoned, right? Can't come as too much of a surprise. But for those who are hoping to get a good up-close personal look at these cursed relics, Zaffis says he's been searching for a new location for the collection. Hopefully somewhere with some good ventilation, you know, really let all that evil air flow. And hey, if you're looking for more videos about haunted museums, haunted objects, haunted dolls, haunted everything really, we've got all more of that in spades. So stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary, keep the screams coming all night long. Let's keep going. Number 4, the Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments. Pack up the whole family and make sure to stop by at the gift shop for the Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments. Don't worry, there's something for everybody here to enjoy. Make sure you take home the miniature guillotine. One quick look at their website is particularly illuminating. Our main product is emotion, boldly proclaimed as their slogan. Yeah, well, agonizing pain is definitely an emotion, so I can't disagree there. The Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments really is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a massive collection of real historical relics and replicas serving to highlight some of the most disgustingly creative works of engineering ever invented. The kind of stuff that would make Jigsaw and his funny little puppet blush with anticipation. The museum's goal is to remind us just how truly unimaginably cruel human beings are capable of being to each other, and the lengths to which we will go to attain such horrid ambitions. The phrase, "those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it," comes up a whole lot on the museum's frequently asked questions page on the website, which is good. So come, learn a bit from such classics like the rack or the brazen bull, so you don't accidentally end up repeating those. I don't think I can even possibly describe what either of those horrifying things do without getting this channel permanently flagged. So if you're curious, maybe take the worst Google trip of your life, or go up and visit the Museum of Medieval Torture Instruments. They've got locations all over the States for your pleasure, and there's even one in Europe, but I'm pretty sure that's a different one. The one I'm talking about right now is the American one. The one in Chicago even offers a ghost hunting tour, as some guests believe there are residual spirits tied to some of the more grisly equipment kept in the dungeons. Guests are invited to spend the night on their own accord, or with the safety of a tour guide, to try and uncover any of the spirits that are said to be still living there, including an old executioner named Thomas, who loves his work so much he just never left. Sheesh. Nearly 1,000 years and he still doesn't take a day off. Some people just love to have their nose to the grindstone, or to forcefully shove someone else's face into the grindstone. To each their own.
Number 3, the Octavius. The cargo ship Octavius met its demise in 1761 after leaving China and setting sail for Britain via the Northwest Passage. At that time, no ship had ever successfully navigated the passage, and the Octavius disappeared, proving it was no exception. A whaling ship discovered the damaged remains of Octavius on October 11th of 1775 and boarded it to look for survivors and cargo. When the men ventured into the below-deck quarters, they found the ship's captain frozen at his desk, partway through filling out the ship's log, and the rest of the crew were similarly encased in ice throughout their rooms. Brr. The whalers snatched up the ship log and fled the Octavius, leaving behind all, including the first and last entries, which were stuck to the desk. The log revealed that the Arctic temperatures and ice captured the Octavius around 250 miles from Barrow, where all those aboard perished on November 11th of 1762. The whalers, however, found the boat near Greenland, meaning it somehow made its way through the Northwest Passage, even with its crew frozen solid. Look, while Frozen might not be my favorite Disney movie ever, did anyone think to check in with Elsa or any of her ancestors? This just seems like a magical accident that could easily be undone. I'm just saying. Number 2, the MV Joyita. This ship was a 70-foot luxury yacht built in Los Angeles in the United States and launched in 1931. Roland West, who was a famous Hollywood director in the 1920s and 30s, was the first owner of the ship, naming it after his wife, Jewel Carmenil, calling the ship Joyita, which means little jewel in Spanish. The ship spent much of the 1930s cruising the west coast of the United States under both Roland West and its subsequent owner, Milton Beacon. It became a Pacific patrol boat during the Second World War, patrolling the seas around Hawaii. Although she sustained minor damage after running aground and had some of her components replaced with lower quality materials, she remained largely intact and in good shape after the end of the war, and by the 1950s was being used as a fishing charter vessel. On October 3rd of 1955, the ship left Apia in Samoa to sail to the Tokelau Island, a journey of about 270 miles. Only one of her 2 engines was running due to equipment failure at the last minute, but the journey was considered safe given its short distance and the favorable weather conditions. So it was carrying medical supplies and wooden construction materials on board and had no dangerous cargo. She also carried 25 people, 16 crew, and 9 passengers, and the journey was expected to last around 48 hours. The ship was reported as overdue 3 days later, and no distress calls had been received. Flying boats from the New Zealand Air Force patrolled the same area that it was thought to be in for almost a week, covering a huge area of open water, but found nothing. Finally, almost 5 weeks later, on November 10th, the merchant ship Tuvalu, traveling to the Funafuti Atoll more than 600 miles to the west, saw a ship drifting ahead of them. The ship did not respond to hails from Tuvalu, and the captain decided to investigate further. Investigation showed that the ship was empty. The crew and passengers were missing, and tons of cargo from the ship was lost. So while the ship itself was perfectly fine and in no danger of sinking, there was some evidence that something had happened on board. Parts of the bridge and accompanying rooms above the the waterline had been damaged, and there was broken glass inside. In addition, stained bandages were found on deck, along with a doctor's medical bag. The one working engine was found covered in mattresses, but with sufficient fuel for it to operate, and the second engine was still partially disassembled and therefore non-functional. And all the clocks on board were found to have stopped at the exact same time, 10:25 p.m. Rather spooky. The communications radio was turned to 2182 kHz, an internationally recognized distress frequency. However, the radio itself was found to not work and was not broadcasting, something which may not have been obvious to the crew. Oh, and all the lifeboats were missing. Some of the story about what happened on the Joyita can be pieced together from what was found by the official maritime inquiry. Like, for example, it's clear what had caused the initial problems on the ship. A corroded pipe, one of those replaced during the Second World War, was found to be leaking, and this allowed water to enter into the hull. It is very unlikely that the crew would have been able to find the source of the leak in open water. The damage to the superstructure of the vessel seemed to be unconnected to the problems they were experiencing, but may have added to the sense that the vessel was heavily damaged. The attempts to send out a distress signal and the lack of response may have led to a rising panic amongst those on board. The fact that whatever had happened had occurred at night also may have led to a lack of situational awareness, as the damage found was minor and would have been clearly recognized as such in the daytime. However, the decision to abandon the ship, if that's what happened, makes absolutely no sense. The 3 lifeboats were far less seaworthy than the ship herself, and there were insufficient life jackets for everyone on board. Furthermore, the vessel itself was perfectly buoyant even 5 weeks later, and the captain would have been experienced enough to recognize this. So while it seems that those on board decided to, leave the safety of the ship in the night and test their luck in tiny rafts, why they did this is a total mystery. Theories range from pirates, once again, to a mutiny amongst those on ship. The crew were never seen again, and this means that 25 people met their end somehow. Furthermore, despite the damage, there was no evidence of violence apart from the bandages, and these themselves suggest there was enough time for someone to administer medical assistance. No trace was ever found of the crew or the life rafts. And what caused them to abandon ship in the dark, only 50 miles short of their destination, remains a mystery to this day. Number 1, the SV Kaz II. So this is the most recent entry in our list, and it was found adrift 88 miles off of the coast of Australia, near the Great Barrier Reef, just 5 days after it set sail from Airlie Beach towards Townsville, Queensland in April of 2007. According to the investigation reports, it was sailing with a 3-person crew who were not experienced sailors. However, what happened to them remains a mystery to this day. Many believe rough weather conditions could be a reason. Others blame, pirates or even communists for the same. The vessel was found in perfect condition, except for the one sail, which had been shredded to pieces, and the 3 men were never discovered. According to investigators, they might have drowned while trying to untangle a fishing lure caught in the vessel's rudder, but others believe that a sea monster could have swallowed them.
Number 5 on this list is the Philadelphia State Hospital. This place is abandoned now, and based on the atrocities that happened here, that's for good reason. All That's Interesting says, in the early 20th century, abuse against patients in these mental asylums was rampant, but few places were as violent as the Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry, where multiple homicides were later uncovered. The facility opened in 1903 as a working farm for the mentally ill, and patients from other overcrowded mental health hospitals were sent there to heal. But the humble treatment facility quickly became overcrowded itself and was expanded into a multi-campus hospital. In 1919, 2 orderlies confessed to strangling a patient until his eyes popped out and then blamed their actions on PTSD from World War I. Despite their confession, the 2 orderlies were kept on staff and even given a pay raise. And this violence continued for years. In 1989, a groundskeeper stumbled upon the corpses of at least 2 other patients. Violence between patients was just as common. At least one staffer reported witnessing a patient stabbing another patient with a sharpened spoon in 1944. Unethical medical practices were also reportedly carried out in the now abandoned asylum. The pharmaceutical company Smith, Kline and French owned a lab at the hospital where they allegedly conducted questionable testing on patients, likely without their consent. They had people working here who literally murdered one of the patients, and instead of doing anything about it, they just gave them a raise. These were different times back then, folks, and this asylum saw all the bad parts of this era. This murder happened all the way back in 1919, and this hospital kept running like this all the way until 1990. 1990 isn't that long ago, guys. We're only a few decades removed from this horrible institution operating. And the crazy part about all of this is that a place like this is meant to help people. What a joke that ended up being. Number 4 on this list is the Beechworth Asylum. This asylum has definitely been talked about on this channel before in relation to haunted asylums. All That's Interesting says, in October 1867, the sprawling Beechworth Lunatic Asylum was opened in Australia. The facility was built on a hill due to the erroneous belief at the time that high altitude could cleanse patients of their mental illnesses. As was typical of early institutions, the abandoned asylum took in a massive number of patients. At its peak, it housed about 1,200 patients and employed 700 staff members. Also, like most facilities of the 19th century, the treatments at Beechworth were notoriously violent. Doctors subjected patients to straitjackets and shackles. Electroshock treatments were common practice there, so much so that they were reportedly mass shock sessions where nearly the entire patient population was shocked simultaneously. Given the extent of the mistreatment that took place at the asylum, it may not come as a surprise that the facility, which was finally closed in 1995, is said to be extremely haunted. Those who worked at the hospital during its last years alleged that the hauntings began long before the hospital was shuttered. The most famous ghost who's seen these days is Matron Sharp. She was said to watch over the patients as they were shocked by the other nurses and doctors. If you ever saw her coming to your room, then there was a good chance the shock therapy was coming for you next. Now you can sense her due to a dramatic cold presence that fills the room. Number 3 on this list is Boblo Island. I had to include Boblo Island on this list to give a bit of a shout out to Ontario, where your boy grew up. Boblo Island was wildly successful for a time and operated for nearly a century. As with a lot of places on this list though, it couldn't seem to power through the 90s and had to shut down. Reader's Digest says, picture an 1898 Victorian amusement park, music from an organ grinder, women's skirts swishing around the dance hall, children's laughter echoing from various newfangled rides. That's what this theme park on Boys Blank Island, nicknamed Boblo, near Detroit on the Canadian side of the Detroit River, was to residents alike. Its doors were shut nearly 100 years later in 1993, and the area is now closed to the public. But you can boat or kayak by the remains, listening for the ghostly sounds of long past visitors. While you can't stay here overnight, you can rent these 8 haunted places on Airbnb. Being on an island really adds to the creepiness for me, I think. Like this place, from all the pictures I could find, it really looks totally detached from all other society. Basically meaning that whatever happens here, you are totally by yourself. Like there is a new set of rules for this island. There have been stories that something lurks here, a spirit or something dark. Be very careful if you ever go to Boblo Island. Number 2 on this list is Pripyat Amusement Park. Pripyat is a town that we've talked a lot about on this channel already. In fact, it was recently featured in a video where we looked at the top 5 mysterious towns that are completely abandoned. Pripyat is a ghost town in northern Ukraine near the Ukrainian and Belarus border. It was named after the nearby river Pripyat and was founded in 1970. Right in the town is a small amusement park that once looked quite fun and had plans to grow into a big Ukrainian park that people might flock to. Those dreams were never realized though, and now it sits in complete and utter disarray. Those dreams were never realized because of the horrible accident that occurred in 1986. You see, the town of Pripyat was basically established to serve the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. When it was first built, it was a closed town basically only for the workers of this place, but it grew and grew as time went on, and at its height had a population of just under 50,000 people. I don't need to go into too much detail about the accident as a whole, because I imagine that you guys are all pretty aware. But basically, this was the worst accident of this nature in human history, and for all our sakes, we need to hope that it never happens again. The radiation damage was absolutely massive, and right after it happened, the entire town of Pripyat had to be evacuated. That, of course, has left the amusement park, right in the middle of this town, completely abandoned as well. Not a lot of people have gone to this town or park since this incident occurred. For a long time, it wasn't safe to set foot within a set radius of the blast. Those who have been brave or foolish enough to set foot into this town and explore the amusement park have reported some strange and scary findings. Rumor has it that some sort of entity lives there. Something dark and evil calling this abandoned place home. A nasty and sinister entity that doesn't like to be disturbed. There have been talks of this being some type of shadow creature or potentially a beast like a werewolf of sorts. Either way, the people who visit this place feel an overwhelming sense of dread when they're there. They also feel as if they're unwelcome, like they entered somebody's home who doesn't want them there. There are multiple reasons why this amusement park is abandoned, so I'd stay away if I was you. And finally, number 1 on this list is Six Flags. Now, I don't mean Six Flags as a chain or anything like that. There's 23 different Six Flags in the United States and not all of them are haunted. One in particular though is currently out of commission, abandoned, and definitely a spot you shouldn't go to. All the Rooms writes, this Six Flags fell out of business following serious damage from Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The park opened in 2000 and was only operating for a few years before suffering significantly during the hurricane, which displaced 20,000 people and killed nearly 2,000 people. The park closed after Hurricane Katrina and there wasn't enough funding for repairs, so it fell into further decay over the last few years. To this day, there's still an eerie sign at the entrance to the park that says closed for the storm. It's an apocalyptic site which has been taken advantage of by Hollywood and used for films such as Jurassic World and Dawn of Planet of the Apes. These filmmakers are way braver than I would be because I would not want to be setting foot on those grounds. The people who have been here all seem to think that something paranormal is going on. Phantom noises echoing throughout the park and other random bodiless sounds are heard all the time. Similarly to a lot of the other things on this list, there is a massive overhanging feeling of dread. The air is thick with it and you can almost taste the discomfort. No one has reported being attacked here, but it seems like that's only a matter of time if people keep going. The mayor of New Orleans is currently looking at demolishing this park, which, in my opinion, probably for the best.
Number 5, the Warner Brothers Jungle Habitat. Originally opening on July 19th of 1972, this park closed its doors by 1976, which is a really bad timeline for a theme park that was technically never completed. The first time Jungle Habitat made headlines was only months after it first opened for business, when an Israeli tourist named Abraham Levy was riding through the safari in a taxi cab and decided to roll down the window to get a better look at some of the animals roaming about. 2 lions attacked the car and mauled the 26-year-old tourist, causing lacerations to his face and shoulder. He took credit for the harm, citing his own foolishness, which helped to dodge a media onslaught. Well, for the most part. By the end of the year, reports of animals escaping into the wilds of West Milford were far too many in volume to be ignored. Besides sightings of harmless animals like peacocks, there were rumors spreading about dangerous animals such as a pack of wolves and a lion being sighted along local roads. These sentiments, voiced 28 years ago, are identical to the rumors still running rampant today. Yep, you heard me, today. Tales told by West Milford residents who have looked out in their backyards include wandering ostriches and a band of baboons running amok in the town's pharmacy. Emus, baboons, and even wolves are just some of the uncaged critters which were known to have escaped the park. I feel like I found the origins for the Night at the Museum franchise. On July 8th of 1974, a 68-year-old visitor from Long Island was grabbed by the trunk of a baby elephant, which then slammed her against a fence and bit her. The woman, Elizabeth Ennis, was later awarded $200,000 by a court. In an account in the New York Times, she claimed the elephant bit her on her right hand, and because of the trauma incurred by being slammed into the fence, she had persistent pain in her right side that prevented her from lifting heavy items. Her husband was awarded $5,000 for loss of companionship. So the animals at the park also had a tendency to damage the cars that passed through. An e-museum for the park says that tigers like to bite and pop car tires, and monkeys like to rip antennas off of cars. Sounds like a lack of good animal training and boundaries to me. So right after the park closed in 1976, some animal carcasses were left outside. This pile grew until 30 animal bodies, including that of an elephant, a bison, a camel, some zebras, were all left lying until April, when the ground had thawed enough to finally bury what was left of the bodies. The 6 months that they were left exposed was a violation of state laws, which stated that any animal should be buried within 48 hours of its death. Despite this violation, Warner Brothers was not sanctioned. Jungle Habitat is gone now, but not forgotten. Reports of mysterious kangaroo sightings in remote corners of West Milford still turn up from time to time. Number 4, Under the Sea Gone Wrong. Disney's River Country was the first water park at Walt Disney World, and possibly the first themed water park ever. Look, as much as I love Disney World and I'm mentally planning my next trip back, I'm here to call a spade a spade. Some consider River Country to be the first water park anywhere, but that depends on how you define a water park. Yes, River Country opened almost a year before Wet n Wild in Orlando, but there were public pools and lake parks with water slides and other aquatic play equipment long before River Country opened. So just as Disneyland had reinvented the amusement park 21 years earlier, River Country reinvented aquatic recreation. The water park's grand opening was on June 20th of 1976, and on Thursday, August 28th of 1980, a sad Associated Press story appeared in newspapers throughout North America. It was reported that a rare but deadly disease caused by an amoeba found in Florida freshwater lakes had claimed its fourth victim, a New York youngster who had spent his vacation swimming at River Country. The disease, amoebic meningoencephalitis, attacked the nervous system and brain. You don't want to know how many tries it took me to say that. The youngster died after the amoeba entered his nose, went through the nasal passage, and attacked the nervous system, including the brain. Investigators from the U.S. Center for Disease Control in Atlanta and the New York Health Department pinpointed River Country as the source of the amoeba after the parents reported that the amusement park was the only place where he went swimming. So photos and maps of River Country show that the park had two bodies of water. The smaller one was a clean, clear swimming pool. The larger one appeared to be a natural cove, completely open to Big Lake, which is the largest natural lake at Walt Disney World. At some point in the 1990s, Walt Disney World banned swimming in its lake. The 1995 map of Walt Disney World still included the resort's beaches under the swimming section, whereas the 2000 edition made it clear that the beaches were strictly for sunbathing. But River Country stayed open. There was never another death from amoebic, very long word that I'm not going to try and say again, linked to River Country. But there were two drownings, one in 1982 and the other in 1989. So River Country had its normal seasonal closing at the end of the 2001 season, but when the time came for it to reopen for the 2002 season, it didn't. River Country never reopened.
Number 3 on this list is the Riverview Hospital. This hospital is located in British Columbia and was still operating and doing some horrible practices way longer than anyone would care to admit. It was first built in the early 1900s in a less populated part of BC. It had almost 250 acres of land to itself and a bunch of different buildings that served various purposes. There was one building called the West Lawn Pavilion, which actually was said to house the most disturbed male patients in the whole country. This part of the hospital eventually shut down in 1983, but the rest of the place, where a bunch of questionable practices were going down, that didn't shut down until 2010. That's right, guys, 2010. Literally only 12 years ago, this place was still operating. Reports revealed that the hospital still employed electroshock therapy in the 21st century and allegedly illegally sterilized a number of patients. In 2005, 9 women received settlements totaling $450,000 following a joint lawsuit filed against the facility over the alleged sterilizations. As much as I want so badly to believe that we are out of this era of poor mental health, we might not fully be. That happened just over a decade ago. If you were sent to this place only a few years prior, then you may have had to deal with this. Kinda makes you wonder how many other places around the world are still conducting horrible treatments that we don't know about. Number 2 on this list is the Ospedale Psichiatrico di Volterra. This abandoned lunatic asylum is located in Italy. All That's Interesting says the asylum at Volterra was meant to be a sort of haven where patients could roam and do as they pleased. There were shops, a gardening company, and a judicial section which became known as the Ferry Pavilion. But the hospital's idyllic objective was sidelined after the facility became overcrowded. By the 1960s, the Ospedale Psichiatrico di Volterra was one of the country's most populated hospitals with more than 6,000 patients. This was largely due to how easy it was to be committed to the hospital, and patients were admitted on the faintest signs of depression to accusations of moral transgressions. The facility was run like a prison, with nurses being referred to as guards or supervisors. Patients were treated like inmates and often sedated or isolated. The cures they were given included electroshock treatments, insulin-induced comas, and ice tank submersions. Patients at the Volterra facility suffered immensely until the hospital was abandoned in 1978 following the passage of the Bassaglia Law, which mandated the closure of all mental hospitals in Italy. I didn't even know that ice tank submersions or insulin-induced comas were a real thing. Like, I just thought stuff like that existed in shows like Stranger Things, but that actually happened. Last I checked, an insulin-induced coma isn't gonna help anyone with schizophrenia. Number 1 on this list is the Willard Asylum. Once again, guys, we have an asylum who initially wanted to help people but ended up doing the exact opposite. All That's Interesting says Willard was a state-of-the-art facility that featured a gymnasium, arts and craft classes, a movie theater, and even a bowling alley. It was meant to be a place where people living with mental illnesses could either devote themselves to their recovery or live in a safe and active environment. One of the hospital's main missions was to treat patients with the goal of preparing them to rejoin society. Despite this ideal, the hospital fell victim to the incomplete ideas and harsh treatments of its day. Patients were still subjected to electroshock therapy and ice baths, and some patients were kept at the asylum until their deaths. Many were buried under unmarked tombstones that still dot the abandoned asylum's grounds. The hospital was finally shut down in 1995. Perhaps most tragic about the asylum's history, however, was the discovery of hundreds of suitcases that were found cataloged in the hospital's attic upon its closure. These were the belongings of patients who died in the hospital and were unclaimed by next of kin. The staff was apparently unable to throw these mementos away. Hundreds of suitcases, guys. Not 1 or 2 or 10, hundreds. That's hundreds of people who died here and were put in unmarked graves. Hundreds of people who died here and whose families either didn't care enough about them to go claim their belongings or were never informed that they died. I'm so happy that times have changed and the stigma around mental health and its treatment is lifting. 100 years ago, the last thing you would have wanted is to have someone try and help you with whatever it is that you're dealing with.
Located at the end of the Mani Peninsula in Greece, you'll find a small landmass called Cape Matapan. The caves in this area open at sea level into a cliff face beneath the headland, the exact point marked by the ruins of a Spartan temple above. The inhabitants built several temples at the site, with the most notable being in dedication to Poseidon and Apollo, for which Strabo in the 1st century AD and Pausanias in the 2nd century AD describe a cult temple that worshipped Poseidon and fronted a cave-like temple on the headland. The cave was believed to be the gateway to Hades, the realm of the dead named for the patron god of the underworld, in which the departed souls were transported across the rivers Styx and or Acheron by Charon the ferryman to be judged on whether they would reside in Elysium or Tartarus. This was one of the several entrances that the ancient Greeks ascribed to Hades, the kingdom of the shades. Others were to be found at the Necromantian of Ephyra, as well as at Alipotripa, another smaller cave network on the Mani. Here, according to the stories, is the place where Orpheus entered the underworld in search of his lost love Eurydice. When their hero Hercules passed down into the underworld, it was again through the Cape Matapan caves. These are not the only legend ascribed to the remote peninsula, however. The Spartans viewed this as a highly significant place of worship, and they built several temples to their gods along the rocky headland. Most prominent amongst the surviving ruins are the remains of a temple dedicated to the sea god Poseidon, located on a hill directly above the cave to Hades. Another story related by Pausanias linked to the picturesque cape relates to the poet Arion, who escaped from pirates to be carried ashore by a pod of dolphins. A bronze statue of the poet riding a dolphin stands on the crest of the cape, not far from the ruins of a temple raised in honor of the sea god Poseidon. The caves at Matapan can still be entered by visitors, although a boat is required to pass through the watery mouth of this particular hellgate. In at number 4 we have Actun Tunichil Muknal Cave in Belize. Uncovered in 1980, the Actun Tunichil Muknal is a mine archaeological site that includes skeletons, ceramics, and stoneware. Actun Tunichil Muknal Cave, otherwise known as the Cave of the Stone Sepulchre, was first entered by the Mayans in AD 300 to 600. It was not until the late AD 700 to 900 that the Mayans went deeper into the cave to perform their ceremonies. The cave is a maze of chambers along with a cathedral-like area for ceremonial sacrifices. In the cave, archaeologists found numerous skeletons, but what makes it even creepier is the fact that most of the skeletons belong to sacrificed people. Many of the remains and artifacts are completely calcified in the cave. cave. Almost all lost their lives to blunt trauma to the head, while most of the pottery found at the site dates from between 700 to 900 AD, which is likely when the bodies found here were sacrificed. One of the cave's most notorious features is the skeleton of a girl whose bones have been calcified into a crystallized appearance. This skeleton is known as the Crystal Maiden. It is unknown what the circumstances of the sacrifices were, though some believe they were to appease the rain god Chak, or possibly the gods of the underworld. Another theory holds that these were believed to be witches, possibly suffering from some kind of mental or physical ailments, and that leaving them unburied in the cave would ensure that their spirits were trapped there. Therefore, from the location to the remains that were found and rituals that were performed here, it's safe to assume that this might just be one of the places that the devil may be hiding.
Coming in at number 3, we've got the New Bedford Orpheum. Abandoned theaters are cursed as a rule. Like, name one abandoned theater that doesn't have a ghost or urban legend attached. Oh wait. They're magnets for drama, it's in their nature. And this Massachusetts-based art house has a flair for the dramatic like no other. Get this, it opened on the same day that the Titanic went down. Talk about a hot start. It operated for a few decades, showing movies and hosting cultural events. The Orpheum was a staple of local culture at the time. However, in 1958, it closed its doors. Not for good, mind you. It would still open on occasion for extra special events and was even used by a tobacco company as storage for a little while. But these days, the Orpheum is still and silent. Ghostly, even. A peek inside will reveal a gigantic, sprawling space, complete with mezzanine, private boxes, and faded murals. The peeling paint and crumbling plaster add to the spooky ambiance. A total lack of audience for ages makes for an echoey good time, too. It's everything an old theater should be, including the creepiness. It's decrepit without being condemnable, which has led the community to rally behind efforts to reopen it. However, none of these have been very successful. It seems like the curse extends out, hitting the folks who would even attempt to resurrect it. Would you take a seat in the audience, or are you scared of seeing an unscheduled show? Coming in at number 2, we've got the Sathorn Unique building. A monument to what could have been the Sathorn Unique building is an interesting case. What was supposed to be a luxurious, high-rise apartment building ended up being an abandoned husk. Perfect for urban explorers. Back in the 90s, a magnificent tower was planned. It was to be 47 stories tall with over 600 units housing all sorts of high rollers in Bangkok. Unfortunately, construction had to stop during the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The building itself was about 80% done, but would never be finished in its entirety. Plenty of money, materials, and man-hours were sunk with nothing to show for it. Well, almost nothing. These days, the Sathorn Unique is known as the Ghost Tower. Thrill seekers and graffiti artists love the sprawling building and have pretty much made it their own. The inside is totally filled with spray-painted murals and other forms of street art. Sure, it's dangerous to go running around in abandoned buildings, but try telling that to any of the folks who do it. Aside from the generally unsavory reputation of street art and urban exploring, why is it known as the Ghost Tower? Well, some locals believe the building was built on the site of an ancient graveyard. This unfortunate placement led to construction delays, accidents, and the eventual abandonment. This story is enough to keep anyone but the bravest out of the Ghost Tower. Another theory is that the building cast shadows on the nearby Wat Yat Nawa, an old Buddhist temple. This, while not being worthy of an outright curse, was considered to be unfavorable. Success is hard to achieve while preventing sunlight from reaching Buddhist temples. Recently, the building has achieved some sort of online fame, with many viral videos featuring folks free-running throughout the tower. This resulted in criminal charges being filed against the trespassing videographers. Is that the result of bad luck or a curse? And finally, at number 1, we've got Eastern State Penitentiary. In East Philadelphia, thrown in a cage, ghosts are coming back because they feel the rage. I'll stop there, you get the idea. At one point, this prison was among the most famous worldwide. It jailed some of America's most prolific criminals, including Al Capone, the inspiration for Scarface, and Slick Willie Sutton, the bank robber extraordinaire. Abandoned prisons are absolutely chock full of phantoms and spirits, and why wouldn't they be? The folks there are probably the most discontent and anger-filled of them all. Eastern State takes full advantage of this too. While the prison itself is no longer operational and houses no inmates, well, no living inmates, they still bring fearless folks around on night tours of the facilities. On clear nights, you can even see moonlight shining through these skylights. In addition to the ghosts of prisoners, it's also said that a colony of cats used to live inside the prison. At some point, they were all captured and neutered, leaving them to die off within the walls. An adept eye might just catch the shadow of a ghost cat slinking about in the halls.
Number 5 on this list is Atlantis Marine Park. We are headed all the way down under for this one because Atlantis Marine Park is actually in Australia. AustralianNews.com writes, Atlantis Marine Park was initially a huge success with families from WA and beyond flocking to the park to watch the live dolphin shows, swim in the pools, ride pedal boats, and have their obligatory photo with King Neptune, a huge statue at the entrance to the park. However, in 1990, just 9 years after opening, Atlantis shut its doors. Western Australia's boom never eventuated, and the 1987 stock market crash put a halt to prosperity. Atlantis closed due to financial difficulty and was left abandoned. It has since been damaged by vandals and has become overgrown and derelict. Old statues can still be found scattered throughout the grounds, as well as broken walls and concrete pools. For years, it was no man's land, popular with dog walkers. However, just last month, the iconic King Neptune was restored to its former glory after a petition by locals who started an online campaign for something to be done with the ruins. Well, I'm glad to see that Neptune is looking fresh again, but I don't know how long he'll stay that way. Apparently, this place, when the sun goes down, is home to some evil creatures. Four-legged mutant things with glowing red eyes that hiss and are nothing that we know of from this world. Now, this could be a bunch of baloney, but that's what some people have reported seeing when they've explored this place at night. Probably safe to go during the daytime, just make sure you set an alarm for 6 p.m. to get out of there if you do go. Number 4 on this list is Crinkly Bottom Theme Park. This one, to my understanding, has been demolished, but it still deserves a spot on this list because of how creepy it was when it was around. Mr. Blobby was a TV caricature in the early 1990s. He was featured on one of Britain's most successful late-night Saturday television shows and was this big pink blob creature with a bow tie on. This was a comedy television show, and this blob thing didn't lack any of that. He would often engage in annoying antics with celebrity guests and become a bit of a British television phenomenon. Well, Mr. Blobby was successful enough that he of course needed toys, merchandise, and heck, while we're at it, let's give him his own amusement park. Sometimes what works well on TV doesn't always translate to a fun amusement park though. Crinkly Bottom was what they called it, and it opened up in 1994. This annoying sidekick's popularity didn't last forever though, and this amusement park's life was very short-lived. The place shut down in 1996 because it simply was not making enough money. Then it faded away into obscurity and everybody forgot about this interesting little business venture. That was until 2009 though, when some urban explorers stumbled upon it again. The once bright and beautiful Blobby Land looked like something straight out of a horror film. It was worn and gross and just reeked of evil. Animals had taken up residence there, and based on how the place looked, it wouldn't have been surprising if some sketchy characters once did business there too. You can't visit it now because it's demolished, but you really shouldn't have been going when it was around anyways.
In at number 3 we have the Gates of Guinea in New Orleans. According to voodoo mythology, the newly dead are sent to a kind of purgatory before traveling to meet their ancestors in the deep waters. Known as Guinea, this realm is presided over by the notorious Loire, who goes by the name of Baron Samedi. Often depicted as a skeleton in corpse paint dressed in a top hat and tails, the Baron is a powerful symbol of death and rebirth, guarding the crossroads which form portals to other worlds. The most important of all these portals are the Gates of Guinea themselves. While some followers of voodoo interpret the 7 gates as a spiritual metaphor, others believe them to exist in the physical realm. One of these stories locates the gates in New Orleans. To enter Guinea, it is said that one must open the 7 gates in the correct order. There are tales of voodoo practitioners opening the Gates of Guinea to reclaim the souls of the dead. Souls in this lost land are also considered to be at high risk from hoodoo magicians, who have the power to reanimate them as zombies. Although the exact locations of the gates have never been disclosed, there have been oblique suggestions over the years that a clue may lie in the Vervi, or summoning sigil of Baron Samedi himself. Appearing as a crucifix surmounted by 7 stars, the symbol might indeed serve as a map of sorts. Once aligned over the crossroads of Canal Street and Basin Street in the city's French Quarter, the stars of the Vervi seem to fall on notable surrounding cemeteries. Therefore, it's not too uncommon to believe that this might be the spot the devil is hiding, with all the talks of spirits, the Baron and the underworld at this location. In at number 2 we have the 7 Gates of Hell in Pennsylvania. In a quiet little backwater of York, Pennsylvania, one finds Pelham Township, by all accounts a pleasant, friendly town and unremarkable were it not be for the rumoured existence of a gateway to hell in a nearby forest. One of the better known legends tied to the location is that an insane asylum on the town's outskirts which supposedly burnt to the ground in the 19th century. 7 gates were built surrounding the remains of the asylum. At every gate, with the distance closing in, the police found more of the escaped patients, capturing them peaceably but killing any that showed aggression in violent ways. According to this particular legend, the inmates, most of them criminally insane, escaped, only to be recaptured using a series of tall fences and security gates. Many lost their lives to guards in the process. What the police and citizens didn't realize was that the construction of the gates prevented the souls of the dead from passing on to the other side, forcing them to be trapped for eternity in the remains of the asylum. Legend says the anger, hate and violence in these souls caused a rift that allowed for hell to open, the gates preventing anything to be let out but also preventing anything from travelling in. An alternate story tells of a doctor who once lived in the town. This man, by some accounts a Satanist, was said to have designed a series of strange gates on this land, which followed a winding path running deeper and deeper into the forest. Where stories agree is that those who pass through the gates in order will find themselves transported straight to the underworld. Only the first gate is visible by daylight, situated in woodland just off Hellam's Trout Run Road. Regardless of what the origin of the gates are, if you were to take a trip to the gates, you'll only find one. The rest of the gates can only be seen during the night. They exist in a realm between light and dark and can only be accessed at that time. If you were to find and pass through all 7 gates, you'll find yourself in hell, unable to escape and trapped for all of eternity. Those who have tried to look for the gates report seeing shadow figures wandering through the forest, the smell of something burning, and screams in the distance. Worst of all, some say they know of a few who have found at least 5 gates, but went off looking for the 6th, they never returned. And finally, in number 1, we have Pluto's Gate in Turkey. Known as Pluto's Gate or Plutonian in Greek, the archaeological site in southwestern Turkey was discovered in 2013 after following the route of a thermal spring. The site matches closely the description of the temple to the underworld that disappeared in the 6th century. The most notable feature of this gate is that deadly vapor still is blown out of the gate. Additionally, this location was once used in ancient rituals to the gods of the underworld and still claims the lives of unfortunate birds who get too close. An archaeological dig revealed the remains of an ancient temple situated on a thermal spring, long believed to have been a gateway to hell. This well-documented temple of Pluto disappeared from record sometime around the 6th century. Amongst the distinguishing features of this particular gate are the toxic fumes that waft out from the tunnels beneath. In times of antiquity, these were often inhaled by the priests of Pluto, promptly sending them into hallucinogenic trance states. Writing at some time around the year 0 AD, the Greek philosopher Strabo claimed that any animal that passes inside meets instant death. Even now, the poisonous vapors claim the lives of birds that fly or nest too close to the ruins. Only the eunuchs of Cybele, an ancient fertility goddess, were able to enter the Hellgate without any apparent damage, the report said. With the mysterious deadly vapor and ancient rituals, the gods being transformed at this location, it's not hard to believe that the devil may just be lurking deep within the temple.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Ground Church Tower. Take one look at this ominous tower poking out of the water and tell me it's not cursed, or filled with treasure, and the treasure's cursed. Sure, it's a church, and churches are places of peace and light, but this one has a tragic story behind it. It was once a lovely place of worship located in South Tyrol, Italy. Folks would come and participate in some pretty average church activities. However, in the 50s, major change was on the horizon. The town needed a new source of energy. In the end, they decided that building an artificial lake would be the way to go. They filled a wide expanse with water and ended up flooding the church. I suppose it was cheaper just to leave some of the buildings as they were instead of demolishing them first. The result is stunning and a little bit ominous. These days, you can see the bell tower peeking out from the top of the water. The rest of the church is down below, wallowing in the murky depths. It sort of feels like a water level in a video game with plenty to explore and frustration abound. I mean, imagine descending into the depths and wading through the many waterlogged chambers hidden below. There could be anything waiting down there. Spirits of wildlife that may have been caught up in the artificial lake, the long lingering ghosts of old churchgoers doomed to float about. It's fascinating and fear-inducing. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Sorrento Abandoned Mill, another Italian cursed building. If you ever visit Naples, you can take a day and head off the beaten path. A canyon nearby is known as the Valley of the Mills and houses all sorts of awesome structures. Ages and ages ago, a flour mill was built. For years it operated, providing flour to the surrounding regions. In fact, it apparently managed to do so for hundreds of years. And if you're at all familiar with the operation of mills before standard safety practices were introduced, you know they were death traps. So for hundreds of years, folks toiled away, grinding out flour and occasionally some workers. Uh-oh. Now, these deaths didn't mean that the mill had to close, it was seen as an occupational hazard of sorts. But then, in the late 19th century, it became isolated from the sea. Tasso Square was built, and this caused the mill to become less practical. Humidity rose in the area, and the mill was forced to shut down. Years later, the building was ultimately closed for good. So we've got a historic mill in a valley closed due to societal progress. Sounds like a recipe for ghosts or a curse to me. If you look at it these days, you'll agree. The mill has been totally overtaken by nature. Greenery has consumed the ancient structure, giving it a foreboding and abandoned look. Moss and lichens cover pretty much every square inch of the walls, essentially daring anyone to come and explore. But be careful if you do, it's hard to tell what might be hidden among the foliage. Maybe a mill worker's ghost missing some essential limbs, or a foreman who lost everything when the grindstones stopped grinding. I hope it was worth it. Progress.
Number 3, Joyland Deaths. Located in Wichita, Kansas, Joyland once featured state-of-the-art rides and attractions, holding a reign of 55 years of fun and joy. Today, the once popular park is being reclaimed by nature. Piece by piece by piece. So Joyland came into existence on June 12th of 1949 and was founded by Lester Ottaway and his sons, Herbert and Harold. Herb Ottaway had a passion for steam engines and race cars, and he refurbished both types of vehicles. By 1934, Herb had refurbished a miniature steam locomotive and cars and was traveling with them to county fairs in Kansas and Colorado. Joyland was open to give Herb's refurbished locomotive a more permanent home. As the attraction became more popular, the Ottaways eventually added a number of different rides and games to the amusement park. Lester Ottaway passed away in the mid-1950s, and his sons continued running Joyland until the early 1970s when they decided to retire. Joyland was then sold to Stanley and Margaret Nelson, who owned the park until it closed its doors in 2004. Joyland featured attractions such as a wooden roller coaster, which I love, a wacky shacky dark ride, a log jam, a sky coaster, bumper cars, a carousel, and a Ferris wheel. On April 6th of 2004, a 13-year-old girl was enjoying a Ferris wheel ride with her friends when the restraint bar holding them in came undone. The young girl fell more than 30 feet, suffering multiple head, arm, and leg injuries. The Ferris wheel was immediately closed while both private and federal investigators looked into whether everything was safe and up to code. The ride was later reopened after these investigations were wrapped up. Also, another notable ride at Joyland was the wooden roller coaster that was known as the Nightmare. Although the roller coaster was a staple at the amusement park, it too saw its fair share of injuries, which is a shame. Like, I really love wooden coasters. On May 25th of 1977, somebody in the single digits of age stood up in one of the carts and fell, died at the scene from the injuries sustained from the fall. Another death occurred 20 years later, on August 27th of 1998, when 35-year-old maintenance worker Kevin Briley was under the ride trimming the grass. He stood up and was tragically hit by the coaster and passed away. My heart hurts telling that tale because, like I said already, I'm such a huge lover of traditional wooden roller coasters. You know, there's just something about narrowly avoiding whiplash that I personally find thrilling. And go figure, Joyland closed its doors in 2004. Number 2, doomed before it could open. The Pripyat amusement park was set to have its grand opening on May 1st of 1986, in time for the May Day celebrations, but these plans were cancelled on April 26th when the Chernobyl disaster occurred, just a couple of kilometers away. Several sources report that the park was opened for a short time on April 27th before the announcement to evacuate the city was made to distract, residents from the unfolding disaster nearby. Constructed under the Soviet Union as a park of culture and rest, typical of many large cities in the then Soviet Union, the amusement park's attractions were manufactured by the Yeskik-based firm Attraction, who were responsible for the construction of many of the amusement parks which remain to be seen around the former Soviet Union today in various states of repair. Located northwest to the Palace of Culture in the center of Pripyat, the park had 5 attractions. The iconic 26-meter Ferris wheel titled Circular Overview, Autodrome bumper cars, a paratrooper ride called Chamomile, Russian swing boats, and also a carnival Pew Pew game. Fun fact, the successor to the original company is still manufacturing the Ferris wheel, paratrooper, and bumper cars to the similar designs as of 2017. Radiation levels around the park kind of vary though. The liquidators washed radiation into the soil after the helicopters carrying radioactive materials used the grounds as a landing strip, so concrete areas are less radioactive. However, areas where moss has built up can emit levels amongst the highest levels of radiation in the whole of Pripyat. So the Ferris wheel actually made news in September of 2017 when Polish tourists turned it mechanically for the first time since 1986. 1966. Thankfully, they returned it back to its original position, but kind of neat that it could still work. Number 1. A cursed history. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park opened its doors in 1926 when proprietor Conley Snidow Sr. purchased the land. His vision to build a place for local families to relax and enjoy time together was realized as the coal miners from local towns descended on it each year, making it a fantastic destination for summer vacations. The park was full of activities. It featured a man-made swimming lake, a racetrack, concessions, and cabins for visitors, looking for an overnight stay. The big cornerstones were the Ferris wheel and the swings, 2 rides that were popular with everyone who spent time at the park. And you know what? That all sounds pretty idyllic to me. Tragedy, though, began to grip the amusement park in the 1950s, when several deaths shocked locals. A young girl's life ended on the swing ride when a delivery truck backed into her seat, killing her in place. Another youngster lost his life when he drowned in the swimming pool after his arm got stuck in a drain pipe. And by 1966, this amusement park closed its doors to the public, and the land sat dormant for decades. In the 1980s, the park again welcomed visitors when Gaylord White acquired the land and set out to restore it to its former glory. In addition to purchasing a Ferris wheel, he found a swing ride that seemed just like the swings that once thrilled guests. Now, fun fact, when they installed the swings on the property, they realized the swings weren't just similar, they were the exact same swings from years prior, something that they decided to advertise during the grand reopening. The Lake Shawnee Amusement Park welcomed tens of thousands of visitors during its second run, which ran for just 3 years in the 1980s. Unfortunately, high insurance prices forced the White family to close their doors for the second and final time after those couple of short seasons, forcing them to pivot to other activities to keep the land active. They hosted fishing tournaments in what used to be the swimming lake, and they planned to create a space on the property for mud bogging, a motor sport the family knew would draw crowds to watch. While excavating a mud bogging track, the White family made a series of surprising discoveries that added depth to the property's history. For starters, the park was built over a Native American burial ground, with an archaeological dig uncovering 13 bodies, mostly young folks. In the 1700s, the property was the active home base for the Native Americans until they seemed to suddenly disappear. Among the bracelets, clothing, and tools that excavators found, they also found mass graves that suggested as many as 30,000 people had been buried on the property. But, that's not the darkest history of the land. In 1783, Mitchell Clay was the first European settler to make a home in the area, which was heavily inhabited by the Shawnee Native American tribe. So while Clay was gone to town one day, the Shawnees surrounded 3 of the Clay descendants who were working in the fields. Bartley met his end first, and Tabitha, hearing the explosion, ran to her brother, where she was attacked and cut by a stabby implement. Her body was dismembered, and both of their scalps were taken by the entire group. Their brother Ezekiel was captured and burned to the stake. A historical marker on the road leading to the park commemorates their memories. One could wonder if the tragic history of the grounds is the reason for the 6 deaths that occurred at the park, eventually leading to it being closed down in 1966. And many locals, including the park's new owner, claim the park to still be haunted.